All right, today we're going to be learning about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to be learning about this using a website called CodePen. So probably step one, we should get a CodePen account. That's pretty easy to do. It's free. Just open up a web browser and go to codepen.io. When you go to that website, you should see something that looks like this. We're going to click the sign up for free button here. And you'll notice that you can sign up with Google or GitHub if you have accounts with those already, or you can just make up your own sign in using an email address. That's the pretty standard way to do things. So you can enter your name and username, your email address, and then choose a password. So notice some of the rules down here. You have upper lowercase letters, symbols, number, thing like that. Press submit when you're done, and you will get an email that asks you to click a button saying, please verify my email address. And once you do that, you should have an account. So once you've done that, just go back to codepen.io. And now you're going to actually go up in the upper right-hand corner and click login. And this is where you'll log in with either your Google or GitHub account if you have one, or the username and password that you entered, and then click the login button. Once you do that, you should see a screen that looks like this. This is how we're going to create HTML, CSS, and JavaScript projects. This website, since it's named CodePen, calls them pens, which is fine. And what you can do is click on Create Pen. I don't want to click this drop-down button, not necessary for now. Just click the actual pen thing itself. And you should see then a screen that looks something like this. Now yours may not look exactly like this. The default, if you click over here and change view, may be like this, or who knows, it could be like that. Feel free to change the view to whatever makes the most sense to you. I'm going to choose the view to be on the left-hand side. It seems the most natural to me. And then basically, you can see we have three boxes, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And over here on the right is the result. It's the web page that we are creating with our program running in it. And so that's it for that. Now we'll move on to the problem that we're going to tackle today. And that problem is the Monty Hall Problem. The Monty Hall Problem was named after a game show host who was named Monty Hall, and he was on Let's Make a Deal. The actual game is slightly more nuanced, but the Monty Hall Problem itself is like the idealized version of this game. In the game, there were three doors. One of those doors had a car behind it, and the other two had goats behind them. Now, you as the contestant would pick a door at random, let's say door one. And then the game show host would reveal at random one of the other two doors that had a goat behind it. Right? Door 2 and 3 might have a goat behind it if you guessed right and the car is behind door 1. So they, in this case, have opened door 3. And they say, okay, there's a goat behind that one. You know that's not the door with the car behind it. What do you want to do? Do you want to keep your original door that you picked, door 1, or do you want to switch to door 2? Once you pick, they will open that door and you get whatever's behind that door. The question became, what's the best strategy? Do you want to switch, or do you want to keep the door that you picked to begin with? A lot of people, when they see this problem, think, well, doesn't really matter, right? It's a 50-50 shot. I know there's a door that has a car behind it, and I know there's a door that has a goat behind it. 1 and 1. It's 50-50. It's a coin flip. This problem actually became infamous because of a column by Marilyn Beausavant that actually said, no, that's not the answer, even though she wasn't the first person to solve the problem, but she correctly wrote back to a reader saying, no, it's actually better to switch. You have a 2/3 chance of winning if you switch, and you have a 1/3 chance of winning if you keep your door. So you're twice as likely to win if you switch. What made this problem so infamous when she answered it is 10,000 readers roughly wrote back to her and said she was wrong. About 1,000 of those with PhDs, like some pretty, and people that were mathematicians, not just, PhDs in other fields. This was impressive as to how much disagreement there was between what was the right answer. And so today we want to write a game program in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that both lets us play this game and shows us that indeed Marilyn Savant was right, that the probability is actually 2/3 if we switch. And that doesn't seem intuitive at all, and that's kind of what makes this problem interesting. So with that, we'll go back to our code pen and let's get started. So let's start filling in some of these boxes. The first box is our HTML box, and you might wonder, what does HTML stand for? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. One thing you'll notice as I've been typing here is it's actually reflecting the text I wrote over here on the right in my program, in my web page. And that is actually the first piece right here, text. HTML is all about text. You can do more things than text, of course, as you've seen in web pages, images, videos, things like that. But it very much faithfully copies your text over into your web page if you type it over here in HTML. Now you'll notice one difference though. HTML is a language, it has certain rules, and one of those rules is that new lines over here in HTML are ignored. The fact that I hit enter here does not mean that markup is going to appear on another line. There is a way to do that, we'll cover that in a moment, but HTML ignores both new lines and extra spaces. So if I say hypertext markup language with a whole bunch of spaces between hypertext and markup, no change. If I get rid of all the spaces, you will see the one space disappear. But basically, one space is the same as 100 spaces. So that's one way in which it's a language. The hyper part I'll just cover quickly because we're not going to do anything with it today. But the hyper idea is like hyperspace. You can jump anywhere with a link in a web page to anywhere else on the web. This was revolutionary in the 90s, and it was actually pretty impressive. It's very different from looking at a book, right? Like where you see a reference number, you flip to the end of the book and you say, okay, they got that from this other book. And then you go to the library and check that book out, and they're like, oh, yeah, I see it. Like the idea that you could click on a link and instantaneously see the other text of that book, and then maybe click on a link from that and see their text. And you could follow this chain in seconds rather than hours or days. So that was a revolutionary concept of the web in the 90s, and we are very used to it today now, but that's where the word hyper originated. However, it's the word markup that is of most interest to us today. Markup is kind of like, when you underline something in text or you highlight it, it's a way of saying, take this text and do something special with it. And we don't have pens or highlighters on a computer keyboard, of course. So what we're really stuck with is something called HTML tags. These are special keywords that do something to your text. So let's see an example. The paragraph tag is how you get new lines in HTML. All tags begin with a less than sign and end with a greater than sign and have some letters in the middle of it that tell you what kind of tag it is. Because computer folks didn't want to type the word paragraph every time they did this, they just gave it the single letter P. That starts a new paragraph. It says, hey, at this point, start the new paragraph. So you'll notice now I do have a new line, and I do have some space between hypertext and markup because it's begun a new paragraph there. However, I said highlighting, right? There's a beginning and an end to a highlight. So you end a tag exactly like you began it, but with an extra slash in it. So let me show you what that looks like. It's less than signs / P greater than sign. Notice it's exactly like this beginning paragraph tag, but it has a slash right in front of the word or letters inside the tag. So this is how you begin and end the highlight. We have highlighted or marked up the word markup itself and said this thing is a paragraph. Notice now we have space before and after markup because we say everything before this is not part of my paragraph and everything after this is not part of my paragraph. Only the stuff between these two tags is my paragraph. So a one-word paragraph is rather boring. We can say, markup is great, isn't it wonderful, things like that. And you'll notice this is all part of the same paragraph. Similarly, we can start a new paragraph here and say language is also great. It's amazing, and things like that. Now, again, I close my paragraph. It's good practice to do that, even if the computer ends up guessing correctly. There are some rules that will allow the computer to guess where you meant to close a paragraph if you don't do it, but don't depend on that. My brain cannot parse HTML and remember all the rules very great. So it is best practice just to be explicit and say, no, I really meant to end the paragraph here. So always use close tags. There are only a couple HTML tags where there's an exception where they do not have a closing tag, and I'll call one out before the end of this lesson. But the vast majority have a closing tag, so just get used to closing all of your tags. If you have an opening tag like P, close it with a /P. So with all that, let's actually jump in to our game itself. So remember that our game is all about there being 3 doors. We're picking one, possibly switching, possibly keeping. There's goats and cars, all that kind of stuff. Probably the first thing I want to do is, delete this. So I'm going to select this whole set of text here and just delete it. And you'll probably have noticed already that it's been complaining about unsaved changes, and that's good. It's basically saying everything you're doing here, if like your computer crashed or if you, close the web page by accident or something like that, is going to be gone. Just be careful there. So it's actually good to give our programs a name right from the start. So let's click the edit pencil icon up here. And I'm going to call this Monty Hall Problem and hit enter there. And then click the save button here. This is going to enable autosave. And basically, this is quite useful. Now it'll just constantly keep saving. And if anything happens, it'll have automatically saved what I was last doing, and I don't need to worry about anything. All right, so let's use our newfound knowledge to actually write down our game. And what we're going to do is just write down the example of how the game could go. Obviously, it won't actually work yet. It's just text at the moment, but it gives us a shell or kind of a sketch of what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to make this bigger again because it made it small after I did the save. And we're going to just start typing. We're going to start with a paragraph. So less than P greater than, and say behind one door, there is a car. The other 2 have goats behind them. It's nice to tell the person playing the game what's actually going on. I'm going to close the paragraph there. So less than /P greater than. And you'll notice on the right, behind one door, there is a car. The other 2 have goats behind them. We've let the user, the person playing the game know what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to begin a new paragraph now and say, pick a door. 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to close the paragraph there. Now, one sadness right now you'll notice is this is just text. I can do things with 1, but I really don't want this to be text. I want this to be a button, something that I can actually click and do something with. And that leads us to our second HTML tag. It is unimaginatively, but good name, button. So here's where those new lines not being reflected in our document come in handy. I'm going to actually put 1, 2, and 3 on its own line here. So I just put, enter, return in the middle of those. I'm going to close, keep the closed paragraph down at the bottom. I still want that to be my paragraph, but I want each of these to be buttons. And so I'm going to enter the button tag and surround, again, mark up the number 1 as a button. And again, close button tag has a /, but it looks identical to the open tag otherwise. And look at what it did. It did exactly what I said. It said, okay, you want the number 1 to be in a button. You've marked up the number 1. It is now a button. I can actually click it. It does not do anything yet, but at least there is the potential for it to do something. I mean, you can see when you click on it, it gets a little bit lighter and it makes you feel like you're pressing something a bit. Let's do the same thing with 2 and 3. So button, greater than sign to do that, and then less than sign / button to close the button tag. And indeed, 2 is now a button. And so you kind of get the drill here. Button 3, close button tag. And voila, we actually have 3 buttons now, so that the person playing can actually pick a door. So that's step one in our game, right? Tell them what's going on, have them pick a door. That's their initial door, right? So now in step two, they say, oh yeah, okay, you've initially chosen door one, let's say they picked. And again, we are just writing text right now as an example of how the game is going. This is not actually playing the game, because if I click button two right now, that doesn't change anything. It's like, no, you've additionally chosen door one. Sorry about your luck. All right. But we also want to tell them what door we're going to reveal. So now I'm going to close the paragraph tag and begin a new paragraph here. You've initially chosen door one. I'm now revealing a goat behind door three. Ooh, fancy, right? Let's close our paragraph there. So again, we're just going through the steps of the game and kind of how we want this to look. At this point, remember, we ask the user whether they want to keep their original door. So I'm going to begin a new paragraph. Final chance. Do you want to keep door one or switch to door two? And we want to give them an option to keep or switch. Again, this part should be a button. So let's just do that now. Button, keep, close button. And a second button, button, switch, close button. And don't forget to close our paragraph tag. This is all part of the same paragraph. Not bad, right? So we say, I'm now revealing go behind door three. Final chance, what do you want to do? We could keep or switch. And once the person has clicked this button, we would want one more thing to happen, which is we reveal what was behind their door. And so final paragraph, this is kind of stage three. I'm opening door one. It has a goat. Oh no. Actually, goats are cool. So yes, basically this is our game. It doesn't do anything yet, but this is how the structure of our game is going to go. And we have buttons that people can click and that we're going to make do things to actually play this game for real. So this is probably a good time to get into the second box. What is the CSS thing? Well, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Now you'll notice one thing different from HTML already, which is that as I typed these things, nothing actually showed up on the right. Text doesn't show up on the right. This is all about what the middle word says, style. The sheet is just saying this is this box is a sheet of style rules. The cascading has to do with how rules apply to tags like this paragraph tag and tags inside it like the button tag, and what would happen if you styled them differently. How does that conflict get resolved? How do style rules get inherited for tags inside other tags, things like that? Not that important for our purposes. It's really the style part that matters to us. So I'll delete this and show you what you actually do with this. This is useful for styling the entire set of tags in your HTML. So let's say I wanted all of my paragraph tags to be a whole lot bigger. I would say, okay, I want to style all the P tags. I add some curly braces to say all the style rules are going to go inside these curly braces. And if I want to change the font size, I say font dash size. And in CSS, you always say what you want to change, a colon, so I'm going to type a colon there, and then what you want the value to be. So for instance, if I wanted the font size to be 16 point font, I would type 16 point and then always a semicolon at the end and that specific style rule. And you'll notice all the text got a whole lot bigger, right? The button text did not. Interesting, right? So if I wanted this to apply to buttons too, that's pretty easy. I just say comma button as well. So this now applies to all the paragraph and button tags in my document. So you'll notice the buttons are now a whole lot bigger and match the size of the text. Now, there is one problem with saying 16 point, and that's accessibility. If someone needs a much larger font size to see the web page properly, they will have set that in their browser, and you will have just overridden that for your web page. So while 16 point may seem plenty big enough to you, they may actually have a default font size of 24 point, and you've just actually shrunk it by quite a bit, and they're going to have a hard time seeing what you wrote. So a better unit of measurement is called REM. So one REM is the default size of the browser font that the user has selected. And if you want to make things bigger, like 20% bigger, just say 1.2 instead. You'll notice that this still makes the text bigger. I can say 1.5 if I wanted it to be huge. I'll keep it at 1.2. But the idea is that this respects the accessibility setting that the user already has and just said, okay, I want this even bigger than their default because I want to like really highlight this and call it out. So this is quite useful, and this is the preferred way of setting font size. Now, there's more things you can do than just font size, right? You can also say, and I'll do this on the next line, the color of the text and the buttons. Let's say I wanted it to be green. I just type color, colon, green, semicolon to end the style rule, and voila, we have lots and lots of green text, including the buttons as well. So this allows us to change lots of things about our document and to do it in a consistent way. This basically applies to the entire document so that if I want to change something, I just change it in one place and the whole document changes automatically. All of the paragraph and buttons are receiving this style. Now, you may wonder, how did I know I could type the word green? Can I type like mauve or other, interesting colors? There's a couple ways to get very specific shades of colors if you want. Um, One way down here is that CodePen actually gives you something called assets that you can click on colors and you can select some of the material design colors here they have included. So if I wanted this specific shade of like blue, I could click that and notice it says I copied some hex code to the clipboard. Fine. I don't know, what does that mean? But if I replace green, if I just paste in the text, it has a hashtag and then 6 characters. And notice it did select that entire blue. Internally in the computer, this actually represents that exact shade of blue. You don't have to worry too much about this. In case you're curious, the first 2 digits are the amount of red, the second 2 are the amount of green, and the third are the amount of blue. And it is in something called hexadecimal, which means it has a few letters, not just numbers in it. And in case you're wondering why red, green, and blue, not yellow and blue, in light, generated light, unlike paint, you actually have red, green, and blue as the primary colors. That will be the colors that your monitor actually uses to form all of its colors. Just like red, yellow, and blue would be the mixture, the primary colors you mix to get different paint colors. So you'll notice that not every color was listed on that page. So there's actually one more way to go about this. And you can actually just go to, go to search basically for an HTML color picker. And you'll notice at least here, there's one built in right in the browser, or not browser, in the search engine. I can actually, slide this around and figure out, okay, I kind of like, this dark color right here. I just click around here to get what I want. Like, let's say I like this one. Notice here is the hex code again. I click copy, and I can close this, and then I get rid of this code and paste in the new code. And I get this kind of dark pinky color. It's a little hard to see actually as text, but that is the color I selected. So you might be wondering with all of this, how on earth do I know the words font size? How, like color, how do I know these even exist? If you want to see the full list, and it's extensive, you can open up a new tab in your browser and type CSS reference. And W3 Schools is a great site. And you can see there is a crud ton of these things. So you'll notice if I scroll down, like color is one of them. I can even click on it and see that they're showing me examples of how to specify color in different formats. So by name, by code, by something else that specifies the red, green, and blue values separately without hexadecimal code. So that's all very, very useful. And you can see font sizes down here too. If you keep going into the Fs, there's font size. And there's a ton of other things that you can set. So if you're curious, click on them, see some examples. You can even play around with them a bit. So all that said and done, I'm going to remove color and just keep the larger font size for now. So there's two more styles I want to deal with right now. One is I'd like to call out the different sections or steps of our game by putting borders around them. It'll be just nice visually to separate them. So this is step 1, this is step 2, and then this is step 3 in the game. Let's put a border around each of those so that it looks more clear that those are actually the steps of the game. The way to do this in HTML is with a div tag. Div just stands for division. It just allows you to group multiple HTML tags and text together and apply style to them holistically. So I'm going to scroll up to the top here and just add a div tag in front of my first section, and then add a close div tag at the end of my first section. Now, first things first, you'll notice that nothing actually changed. Div by itself doesn't do anything much. It's only when we apply a style to it below that it will actually do something. Now, before I apply that style, I just want to mention one important thing here. Notice I closed my div tag after the paragraph tag. Close. This is important to nest things properly. If I had put div before the paragraph, then effectively I've started a paragraph and then closed the outer div and then closed the paragraph. This is the wrong order of closing, right? Just like boxes within boxes, the beginning and end of one box is always within the beginning and end of the bigger box holding it. You need to use the same rule with HTML tags. If I've opened a paragraph tag inside of a div, I need to close that same paragraph before I close the full div. Just keep the nesting right. If not, things get a little weird. I will actually show you this down drop arrow here. Format HTML will actually format the HTML to make this look a little more obvious. It will indent things, just like the buttons got indented here, to show you that indeed all of these paragraphs are inside of this div. It's just a nice way of lining things up visually so that you can see inside what's inside this close and open div tag. Okay, let's actually style this thing now. So I'm going to go down in my CSS and say div and curly braces again, because I want to provide a style for div and I want to add a border. So border, solid. Let's just do solid and not type anything else for the moment. And you'll notice, voila, I have a nice border around my first step. I don't have a border around my second and third step because I have not put div tags around them. Let's do that now. So I'm going to type div here. And that should go all the way down to the keep switch. That's the end of the second step, right? Where the player chooses whether they keep or switch their door. And then finally, a div around the third step, which is just one paragraph of here's what happened. And I can format my HTML again if I so wish, and it indents all of my paragraph tags nicely, showing me the 3 steps of my game. And I have borders around all 3 steps now. Now, you'll probably notice there's 2 kind of sad things here with our formatting. One is our text is way too close to this border right here. And the second is we have this double line, because actually it is 2 lines. The top box's bottom line is right next to the middle box's top line, and so it's looking extra thick. So CSS gives us something called the box model. You have a border, and on the inside you have padding, and on the outside you have margin to provide space. So we're going to set both of them. Let's try padding first and see what it does. Remember, padding is internal space. So padding, and I'm going to set this to 1 rem worth of space, a default font size worth of space. And that actually worked, right? We have some space here now. Now notice it worked a little too well. We have some spacing, some extra spacing now above and below this, and you can't see it, but also to the right. This, at least the top and bottom, is not quite what I want. I'd rather have no padding at the top and bottom, but have some padding on the left and right. We'll get to fixing that in a moment, but let's first look at what margin does. So margin, remember, is spacing on the outside. Margin, and I'm going to add a little bit less spacing here just to show you can do that. 0.7 rem, a little bit, 70% of the font width. So you'll notice there's now spacing here. And these, we don't have that double line anymore because those two lines aren't right on top of each other, right next to each other, I mean. And so margin has fixed our problem. So returning back to the top and bottom space problem, thankfully CSS allows us to specify different padding of the top, right, bottom, and left very separately if we want to. There are two ways to do this. One is I can say padding left is 1 rem. Notice now that that value does not apply to the top anymore. If I wanted to set padding top separately, I would set it to 2 rem. And notice there's now a crud ton of space here, but there's still no space on the bottom or on the right. So this is one way you can control padding separately and individually. However, you can, if you want to set all 4 paddings at the same time, do this in one shot with a shortcut using the same padding thing that we just had. So CSS allows you to specify all 4 values, and they're specified in the same order as a clock face. You have 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. This is top, right, bottom, left. So if I specify 4 values here, 1 rem, 2 rem, 3 rem, 4 rem, what happens here is it says, okay, your top's 1 now. Your right, which you can't really see, is 2. Your bottom is 3, and your left is 4. That's nice if I wanted to set them all individually. However, there is a shorthand for this because normally you want the top and bottom and left and right to be the same, right? It's usually good if you have symmetry top to bottom and symmetry, possibly different symmetry, left to right. So if you delete 2 of these values, what it will do is it will take this one as the top, as it did before, and this one as the right, as it did before, but then it will also use the top as the bottom, and it will use the right as the left to give you the symmetry. So this is effectively top and bottom, this is left and right, and now we can get the behavior we want. We don't really want spacing top and bottom, right? That the paragraph's already giving us enough spacing. So we're going to set this to 0, and then we're going to set this left and right to 1. That gives us the spacing here, but doesn't give us too much spacing on the top and bottom. And I will also mention that margin works exactly the same as padding was just described. You can have 4 values, you can have 2, the symmetry, everything works the same for margin as well. Now, we have our game. This is what it's going to look like. We've formatted it a bit, but now I actually need to handle the real gameplay, right? The first thing I really need to handle is the fact that I shouldn't be able to see all 3 steps to start with, right? It should only show me the first step and wait for me to click a button before showing me the second step. Same with the second step, waiting for me to click one of these buttons before it shows me the third step. So that's the part we're going to do now. Now, I'm going to show how to hide the first 2 steps by default, and then we're going to write some JavaScript code to actually show them again at the right time. So, how do you hide something in CSS? Well, the answer is display. And if I set display to none instead of block, then you'll notice everything disappears. Well, that's a little too far. Again, the default value is block here. Notice it just shows up like it had always before. The problem is I'm controlling all 3 divs at the same time, and that's not what I want to do. I want to control 2 of the 3 divs without touching the third. How on earth do I do that? Well, it's time to start actually giving IDs to these div tags. ID is just like a driver's license or other form of identification ID. The key is that it's unique. We can actually give a different ID to each of the 3 div blocks and then just select bottom 2 and say the 2 with that ID, those are the 2 we want to hide. So what does that look like? This is the first time we'll see an HTML attribute. Yes, you can type more than just the HTML tag name in between the less than and greater than sign or angle brackets. So here I'm going to go inside the first div tag and say ID space ID equals and quotes. That's important. You have ID, the equal sign, the quotes, and then we give it a name, give it an identifier. I'm going to call this step 1. You can name this whatever you want. I'm choosing step 1. Again, nothing has happened yet. I'm going to do the same thing for this div, ID equals step 2. It is important that these are unique. If you try to make 2 of these step 1, very weird things can happen. The ID should identify one and only one thing in your entire web page. All right, third div, not surprising, ID equals quote step 3. We have now given identifiers to all 3 steps. In CSS, you can specify, instead of a tag, you can actually specify the identifier with a hashtag before the name. So if I want to select just step 2, I can say hashtag step 2. That will select just this middle box, the thing with the ID given as step 2. And then I'm going to put my curly braces down here in CSS, just like I always do. And I'm going to set display to none. I'm going to hide step 2 block, and there it's gone. So that is how we select individual divs without selecting them all. I can remove this display block now. It's not doing anything. As I said, it was the default. And remember, just like in CSS, if I want to hide step 2 and 3, I can just use a comma like I did with the p tag and button tags. So I can say, yeah, step 2 and step 3, please set the display to none. And now I've hidden both the steps by default. So now how do we actually make a button press here show step 2 or step 3? That's where JavaScript comes in. JavaScript allows dynamic actions like reacting to a user pressing a button. We're going to use one of the most common commands in JavaScript. It's document.getElement by ID. You'll notice I've capitalized element, by, and ID. That is important. You actually have to capitalize those letters and those letters only for this to work. And then put some parentheses after that. This says grab the entire document, this page right here, and drill down, get me the element, in this case the div tag, with the following ID. I say in this case the div tag because that's the only thing I've given IDs to so far. We're going to say quote step 2. So that will go take the entire document and then grab this div tag. And we want to change the style of this div tag, specifically the display of that div to none. So I'm going to say dot style dot display, and sorry, I said none. I mean set it to block to show it again. So how I write that is dot style dot display equals quote block end quote. This has to be in quotes in JavaScript, even though it didn't have to be in quotes in CSS. We'll go through that part later, but for right now, let's just put it in quotes. That's how it has to be. If you don't put it in quotes, JavaScript won't understand what you're trying to do. So notice step 2 shows itself again. Well, that's weird. We said hashtag step 2 display as none, but then JavaScript runs this one line of code and says, okay, set it back to block. Block means display it, and it did display it. So this isn't quite what we wanted to do, but we're getting in the right ballpark. What we really want to do is make a new command that has this line of code in it. In JavaScript and most languages, they say this is a function. Functions are just us creating a new command. So I'm going to write the word function here, and I'm going to call my new command choose initial door. And notice I'm capitalizing the first word or first letter of each word. This is sometimes called camel case because of the humps that it kind of looks like with the capital letters and lowercase letters. It's a common way of naming things, and it's the JavaScript style way of doing it. So I'm saying function choose initial door. That creates a new command or function called choose initial door, and I need to put parentheses after this. Normally you would put inputs to the function inside these parentheses. We're not going to have any inputs right now, but you can imagine with other commands like please go to the grocery store. you probably want to give them some input as to what you want them to grab you from the grocery store. The command itself can sometimes use some additional information to know how to do the command correctly. If you told somebody to go to the grocery store and all they do is go to the grocery store and literally come back without buying anything, they probably didn't do what you wanted them to do. Anyway, for now, no inputs. And then just like CSS, all the code for our new command is going to go inside curly braces. So I'm going to put an open curly brace here and a closed curly brace here. And just like CSS, usually it's natural to indent all the code inside the function so that you can visually see very clearly all the lines of code that are part of that new function. So I did all that, and you'll notice step 2 disappeared. What's going on with that? We've created a command, but it doesn't actually run the command until we call the function. The way you call a function is you just write choose initial door with some parentheses again and any inputs that you wanted in there and semicolon. In JavaScript, you put the semicolon at the end of most lines. So choose initial door is now called. This, when the computer sees these 3 lines, it creates the command. When it sees this line, it runs the code inside this command, which at this point is just 1 line, which sets step 2 to block display that is showing. And you'll notice we do see step 2 again. Again, we're still not quite there. This isn't what we want. We want to do this when we click a button, not just automatically. So instead of calling it down here in JavaScript all the time, I want to call it when somebody clicks my button. This button up here, for instance, any of these 3 should run this code when they're clicked. How do we do that? Thankfully, there's an attribute. So remember, ID was an attribute. We have another one now called onClick. On clicking this button, what do you want me to do? So I say onClick equals quote. And then I say, I want you to choose initial door. Again, open, close parentheses in case we had any inputs, but you have to include it even if you have none. And that's it. You can put a semicolon here as well if you want. It ends up being optional, but it's fine to put there. And now when I click button 1, we expect it to call our new function that we created, our new command. That will jump down here and it will say, okay, run all the code in this function, which is only 1 line, and that should show step 2. And indeed it does. Yay! This is actually what we wanted, right? When we click one of these buttons, it should show step 2. Now, we need to do this for all 3 buttons, right? We want, no matter which button they click, it should show step 2. So let's do that now. OnClick equals choose, and we're going to call the same function, choose initial door. And same with button 3. OnClick equals choose initial door. So now, no matter which button I press, it'll actually show step 2. Now I need to do the same thing for these buttons. So this becomes very similar. I need to make a new command. Let's call it choose final door, because that's kind of what I'm doing when I click one of these buttons. So function choose final door. Again, open, close parentheses, curly braces. And it's going to be the exact same command except for step 3 instead of step 2, right? We want to show step 3 when somebody chooses their final door. So document dot get element by ID parentheses quote step 3. Remember that this will go into your document. It'll go find something with ID step 3, and we're going to select the style of that thing, dot style, and we're going to specifically set the display inside that style, dot display. And we are going to set that equal to block, just like we did with step 2. Now, we need to actually call this function from somewhere when somebody clicks one of our keep or switch buttons, right? If they click keep or switch, we want to show step 3. So again, just like we did before with the onClick attribute, we say space onClick equals quotes choose final door with some parentheses and a semicolon. Again, switch button needs to do the exact same thing. On clicking the switch button, please run the choose final door function. And let's see how that works. We click a button, it shows step 2. We click a button, it shows step 3. Beautiful. This is so close to what we wanted. There's just one problem. How do I play the game again? All these steps are already shown. How do I like rehide everything and get it to, back to the initial state? Usually you want a restart button, so we're going to add that too now. So go up here to the top of your HTML, and we're going to add a button up above step 1. So I'm going to give myself a little space here. Button, restart game, close button. And there you go. Doesn't do anything yet, but we want the person to be able to click restart game and rehide steps 2 and 3. So let's go down in JavaScript and make one more function. Function restart game. Parentheses again, not going to do any inputs right now. Curly braces. And now I want 2 lines of code. I want to both grab step 2 and set its display to none, just kind of like this line of code, but with the word none here instead of block, because I want to hide it again. But I want to do the same thing for step 3. So we're going to have 2 lines of code, both of them setting step 2 and step 3 to none in that order. So let's type that out. Document.get element by ID, step 2, style, display, equals, this time remember, quotes, none, semicolon. And we want to also do the same thing to step 3. So we type the exact same code again. Getting somewhat repetitious by now, right? Get element by ID, step 3. Dot style, dot display, equals none, in quotes, semicolon at the end. Cool, so restart game, this function will hide both step 2 and 3 again, just like our CSS had told us to at the beginning. And so all we need to do now is hook up our restart game button to this function, just like we've done with the onClick before. So onClick in our restart game button equals call the restart game function from JavaScript. And now we have something that can actually be restarted. I click 2 or whatever button, I click keep or switch or whatever, and I click restart and it hides everything again. Each of these onClicks are simply running code in a function down here in JavaScript. And so now we actually have our game displaying correctly. And all we really have to do to finish it off is fill in these values correctly. And the game will be done. So we'll do that in part 2. Thanks so much.